We're proud to support the craft of journalism. UBS brings you the latest news from around the world with The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Be part of an international network that brings together leading insights, research, and technology across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs, with you at the center of it all. UBS. Advice is our craft.
You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 20th of August 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead, after the high-stakes meeting at the White House, how do the promises made there resonate in Asia? We'll cross to Tokyo to analyse if security guarantees and promises by both the US and Russia are trusted in that part of the world. Then,
some of the people who came out of it are quite optimistic, but I really don't know what about. I know that the only person who still is optimistic is Putin.
We'll also take in the view from Eastern Europe with the former Lithuanian foreign minister. We'll flick through the papers, find out why Japan has become the #1 workation spot, and reveal some exciting news from the luxury brand Louis Vuitton. We'll have a roundup of television news, and finally,
very tasty Malaysian dinners or lunches, minimum fuss. This book, I'm all about getting food on the table ASAP.
Renowned chef Mandy Yin's new book spreads the legacy of her home cuisine. That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. Rwanda-backed M23 rebels killed at least 140 people in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo in July, Human Rights Watch said in a report today that highlighted how violence remains elevated despite the US and Qatar-backed peace talks currently underway. On Tuesday, India and China agreed to resume direct flights and step up trade and investment flows as the neighbours rebuild ties damaged by a 2020 border clash. And Air Canada and its 10,400 unionised flight attendants have reached a tentative deal, ending the airline's first cabin crew strike in 40 years that disrupted travel for hundreds of thousands of passengers. Do stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. Now, at a meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky and European leaders in the White House, Donald Trump said he will help arrange European security guarantees for Ukraine if peace can be agreed with Russia. But how do those protections in one part of the world resonate in another? As tensions rise in Taiwan and on the Korean peninsula, let's explore what these shifts mean for Asia. So to do that, I'm joined now from Tokyo by James D. Brown, who's a professor of international affairs at Temple University's Japan campus. James, many thanks for coming on The Globalist. From an Asian point of view, how convincing are Western security guarantees to Ukraine when Russian missiles are still falling during negotiations? And if Moscow doesn't seem willing to honour any deal, what signal does that send to the region about the value of such pledges?
Yes, well, thank you very much. So in East Asia, clearly the events in Ukraine and the long weekend of summitry has been watched exceptionally closely. I think the first thing to say is that Russia's invasion of Ukraine does very much affect the security of East Asia. That's made clear by the fact that Russia's invasion is facilitated by Chinese financial support and then also by North Korean missiles. So it's certainly relevant in that regard. And then with the security guarantees, the feeling that now the Trump administration is to some extent negotiating over the head of Ukraine, certainly in Alaska, and then also that it's not willing to really stand firmly behind security guarantees, that does make US partners and allies in Asia very nervous, and I think especially Taiwan.
Well, of course, Donald Trump claimed Xi Jinping told him China wouldn't invade Taiwan while he was in office. Taipei says the island must now rely on itself. So I wonder how much of a shift that marks and how it could change Taiwan's dealings with outside partners.
Yes, well, if you are sitting in Taipei, you must be looking at developments with very great concern. So Donald Trump, in the run-up to the Alaska meeting, made it very clear that he was interested in a land swap that would see Ukraine giving up even more territory to Russia. And Trump's idea here was to talk about this first with the Russian side and then essentially seek to present it as a fait accompli to the Ukrainians and to sort of bump them into accepting it. Now, if you think about that from Taiwan's point of view, you could see how that could be so very worrying. If Trump is willing to pursue sort of Yalta-style agreements where you have the big powers negotiating and carving up territory, if he's willing to do that with the Russians, why not with the Chinese? And so I think that's part of the concern in Taipei.
Yeah. So the joint US-South Korea military exercises that began this week are presented as a show of strength. Pyongyang calls them a provocation. Do you think that these drills really boost security, or do they just harden North Korea's resolve?
Oh, I think the drills are absolutely essential. That we always tend to think when you have these drills coming around that it's directly connected with recent developments. We have to keep in mind that drills are a natural part of an alliance. If you have troops deployed in South Korea, they will be worthless if they're not able to conduct military exercises. So I think that it is a routine part of the alliance, but an absolutely crucial one. Having said that, in South Korea, those same concerns about the reliability of the US alliance are certainly there. This is partly about Trump's reluctance to militarily support allies and partners, but it's also about tariffs. If you have your ally being so willing to threaten you economically, then that also has implications for the security relationship. So South Korea is very noticeable that discussions about pursuing nuclear weapons has very much moved up the agenda in recent months.
Well, let's talk about nuclear weapons because Kim Jong-un is openly pushing for more. There's a Reuters report this morning. It says that Trump's flakiness with regards to Japan's military alliance has encouraged really the unthinkable, which is nuclear weapons. Although Japan's a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, it has every building block necessary to achieve armament in a short space of time. And then we're also looking at polling in South Korea. That shows up to 75% of the public there is in favour of the country building its own nuclear weapons. So how is this shifting the balance on the peninsula as far as nukes go?
Yeah, so I think we have South Korea and Japan being moved by the same push factors. Their concerns about the reliability of the alliance with the United States, but there are different stages of the process. Within South Korea, there's really a very active debate, and as you noted, public support for South Korea having their own nuclear weapons. In Japan, it's rather different. What's happening here is a few politicians are, raising the idea, seeing what the public response would be, and the government itself is not willing to go so far as to say that they're actively pursuing it. Reasons for this very obvious. It's Japan that was the victim of the atomic bombings in 1945. So there are different stages, but it really does show you just how worried that they are if they're willing to take that nuclear step. One argument against it is, well, to what extent would it really make that much of a difference? As long as you're confident that the United States, even if it kind of is less reliable in some respects, if the nuclear umbrella is still there, well, then do you really need to have your own nuclear weapons?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, looking at Ukraine, is there a danger that leaders in Beijing and Pyongyang take away the lesson that military muscle still matters much more than any diplomatic promise?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that that's another major concern here, that the security of especially some of the smaller powers in East Asia rests, well, certainly partly on US support, but also on a rules-based international order, which says that more powerful states cannot change the status quo by force. By rolling out the red carpet for Putin, by talking about giving away more Ukrainian territory, Trump's showing that really he doesn't value that rules-based order whatsoever. So if sovereignty, if the principle of territorial inviolability is not something which the US values, then that really does unsettle the entire system of security in East Asia.
And so with Washington pulled in these two directions between Europe and Asia, are Asian countries looking to build something more regional of their own, given that perhaps the US is not entirely reliable?
Yeah, well, that's often what security experts recommend, with very good reason. It's probably the biggest step, the most important step that could be taken. And here, what really stands out is security cooperation between Japan and South Korea. If those two countries were to form some type of alliance, a mutual security kind of guarantee between the two of them without the involvement of the United States, that would enormously bolster their security and would perhaps mean that nuclear weapons were less of a priority. The problem, of course, is historical matters and public opinion also, which means that security cooperation between those two countries, because of Japan's history of colonialism against Korea, is not really something which can easily move forward.
James, thank you. That's James D. Brown of Temple University in Tokyo. And this is The Globalist. It's roughly 72 hours since Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and a phalanx of European leaders visited US President Donald Trump in Washington, D.C. That meeting and subsequent manoeuvring has been followed especially closely in the Baltic states, which, though theoretically protected by membership of NATO, have long feared that they could be the victims of any strategic miscalculation which emboldens Russia to take further steps to restoring its empire. Monocle's Andrew Muller spoke earlier to former Lithuanian Foreign Minister Gabrielius Landsbergis. Andrew began by asking for his general impression of this week's meeting at the White House.
Well, as many, you could call the beginning of the meeting where, a nail biter with not knowing what to expect. Whether President Zelensky would be bullied like he was in February, or, it would be a nicer thing. Well, actually, that was a nicer thing than we have expected. But when the meeting wrapped up, I think that the problem is that we really don't know what is going to happen next. Some of the people who came out of it are quite optimistic, but I really don't know what about. I know that the only person who still is optimistic is Putin. That is still the biggest problem for 3.5 years.
What struck you as the reason for that extraordinary scramble of European leaders to go with Zelensky? Were they just desperate to avoid a repeat of what happened in February?
No, I think that people do understand the historic importance of what is happening and what potentially can happen. When President Trump, says that, Ukraine has to, just make territorial concessions, people do remember 1938, they do remember 1945, and they do understand that we are on the threshold of exactly the same thing again. Whether we are able to stop it, that still, requires an answer that has not yet been answered, because I haven't seen Europeans coming out with a strong proposal that would counter Trump, that would, put our proposal on the table. But at least we were there. At least we would not allow, very bad things to happen.
I mean, there is now increased talk of a meeting between President Putin and President Zelensky. It may even have been agreed by the time we broadcast this. But does that strike you as something that would be actually useful at this point? Or is this all just going to offer Putin more opportunity to posture and strut and run out the clock?
At this stage, I would be very surprised if the meeting takes place. There's very little reason for Putin now to agree on anything rather than full Ukrainian capitulation. He believes that he can win this war. He believes that he can break the front and the morale of Ukrainian people, given time. Now, to make any sort of concessions on his side, I mean, concessions, when it comes to him, I wouldn't call that concessions, but there's no real reason. So I would be, again, surprised. Maybe there are things that we just don't know, right? So, for example, there has been a potential call between President Trump and Putin during the meeting in Washington. Maybe certain things would have been said. But at this stage, at least publicly, we have not heard anything that would make Putin uncomfortable about the situation that he's in.
But does that strike you as the real problem here? And I understand why it's not being addressed, because it's a fairly unhappy prospect that Vladimir Putin is thinking, I can do another 3 years and another million casualties. I'm not bothered either way, but is Ukraine willing to fight on for another 3 years and another however many 100,000 casualties they've suffered?
Yeah, I mean, Ukraine is in an extremely tough position, right? So, one might say that certain leaders are taking a role of administrators of capitulation. Kind of like there's an administrator of bankruptcy, right? So basically when there's nothing that you can do. You cannot take a loan, you cannot help any way the company. So basically you just administer, the situation. So it feels like that, right? Because we're not talking about something that would change the game, that would put Putin into, bad position, change his calculus, take Russian frozen money, throw it at Ukraine, 190 billion euros. That would change the field. At least one thing that has been said today after yesterday's meeting, that President Zelensky has mentioned and offered a solution to President Trump of $100 billion of equipment that will be paid by Europeans and given by the Americans. That sounds serious. These sort of things, they would change Putin's calculation. But whether they are real, it's too early to say.
But would the security guarantees that people have alluded to, and granted that we haven't heard any details at all, might they be the kind of things that would change Putin's calculus, at least as far as going beyond Russia's current positions is concerned?
They would if they're real. If, for example, there have been talks, at least again from what I heard in London, where, leaders of the country are saying, well, maybe if we would station the troops, and we would station them in the western part of Ukraine. I mean, how would that work? I mean, so you would turn your backs on the attacks that happened in the east, in order to stay safe. I mean, the main question here is that there are no more, and it has been for a while, there are no more easy solutions. It's just impossible to help Ukraine without skin in the game. We have to think that we will have to pay if we agree that Ukraine is fighting for us. If they're fighting for us, if that is the thinking, then we have to pay for it in one way or another. And if we're still in the mindset that, well, we will station troops here and, Ukrainians will fight there, and we are, Russian troops and British troops or Lithuanian troops or Polish troops will never meet, well, unfortunately, that might not happen.
That was Lithuania's former Foreign Affairs Minister Gabrielius Landsbergis in conversation with Monocle's Andrew Muller. Still to come on the programme.
Beauty, as compared to fashion, is easier and costs less money, maybe, to make. It's the product doesn't really cost as much as, say, a silk shirt, and marketing the product, that's really what it's all about.
We'll hear some exciting news from Louis Vuitton. This is The Globalist.
Craft is its own reward, which is why at UBS, we're honoured to work alongside over 50 of today's leading Nobel laureates, each an expert in the art of economic science, bringing you engaging discussions, actionable insights, and inspired solutions, all focused around the questions that shape our world today. For a better outlook, find a Nobel perspective. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Well, this is The Globalist on Monocle Radio. I'm Georgina Godwin. The time now in London, 7:19, and we're going to continue with today's newspapers. Joining me is Zoe Grunewald, who is Westminster editor at The Lead. Good morning to you, Zoe.
Good morning.
Let's have a look at this row brewing between Israel and Australia. What's prompted this?
Yeah, so this is the latest, I think, in Benjamin Netanyahu's fight with quite a lot of the Western world over his assault on Gaza. So the latest casualty in this is Australians. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. Netanyahu has accused him of being a weak politician. This is after Australia barred a far-right member of Netanyahu's coalition from entering the country on Monday, where he was due to speak at a conference. In return, the Australian Immigration Minister, Tony Burke, has accused Netanyahu of lashing out. And he said to the Australian Broadcasting Corporation on Wednesday that strength is not measured by how many people you can blow up or how many people you can leave hungry. The Australian Prime Minister later said he doesn't take these things personally and he treats leaders of other countries with respect and engages with them in a diplomatic way. But quite clearly, this is a row that isn't going to end anytime soon, because a lot of this comes off the back of Australia joining other Western nations in recognising the state of Palestine.
And I mean, it's just yet another example of Israel absolutely alienating all of the major powers.
Yes, it really feels like Netanyahu particularly has backed himself into a corner and is now turning on countries that were typically seen as Israel's allies, because, you know, they are stopping divisive members of his coalition from entering their country, or they want to see the recognition of the state of Palestine. All of these things are quite popular domestic policies. You know, people aren't happy with Israel's bombardment of Gaza, but Netanyahu has politically backed himself into a corner. He's very much hostage to those far-right members of his cabinet, and it doesn't look like the war is going to end anytime soon.
Well, another man who seems to fall out with everybody he comes across and retreat into childish language is Elon Musk. So he is talking about Sam Altman, whom he calls Scam Altman. Honestly, these childhood playground insults from these people that should know better. But tell us what his beef is with Altman.
Yes, so Elon Musk is called Sam Altman, and obviously these are the two big giants in AI policy in the US at the minute. He's called him a swindler, and this is after Altman rejected a £97 billion bid for OpenAI's controlling non-profit. Altman, obviously, when this happened, hit back with a dig about Musk's troubled Twitter X deal and how he's losing money on X. Basically, these two tech giants, these tech billionaires, two of the most, you could say, influential and powerful men in the world when it comes to technology, are now at war over the future of OpenAI. We know OpenAI is part of the ChatGPT and general AI policy in the US. Both of these men have significant influence, not just over tech policy, but also, of course, over politics. I mean, Musk is no longer in government, but, you know, he's still very, very powerful. Altman wants to raise £500 billion for his Stargate project, which has White House backing. And these two are absolutely at odds with each other. Musk is still trying to do this kind of hostile takeover. And it really is a fight for not only the future of AI, but, whether these two men, who is going to come out victorious and therefore more powerful over the other one.
And I mean, we're seeing reports that OpenAI is becoming the most valuable company in the world.
Absolutely right. And, OpenAI used to be a kind of not-for-profit. The original founding idea was that it would be kind of open to everyone, it would be backed by safety. But now, partly because of this huge kind of arms race around AI, Altman wants to get more investment in it, he wants to scale it up, he wants to make it for profit. And Musk is accusing him of sort of going back on the founding principles of it. It really is a microcosm into all these battles that are going on across the world around artificial intelligence.
And just, it really does point to this sort of cult of personality, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And we know Musk is an incredibly divisive figure. He is very loud. He has a very certain way of speaking to other people. It's very kind of, as you say, playground-ish, almost two young boys having a go at each other. But actually, it's not to be laughed at, because the amount of power they wield over this technology that, many people are saying could actually define whether we continue to exist over the next few decades. It really isn't a laughing matter, yet it does seem to be that this is all hashed out very publicly online in such childish terms.
And I mean, just picking up on those childish terms, of course, this all stems from Donald Trump and the way that he puts out messages on social media, and he chooses nicknames for people that are meant to kind of humiliate them or belittle them. I think what's really funny at the moment is the governor of California, Gavin Newsom. I don't know if you've seen his tweets, but he's taken to absolutely echoing Donald Trump, doing it all in caps, using names, basically trolling Trump. But it's very worrying that this is the way politics is being run.
Absolutely. And I saw a study the other day that said the way Trump speaks is increasingly becoming part of our regular lexicon. So all these phrases he has, sad in capital letters with an exclamation mark. Data scientists can see that people across the world are using this language when talking to each other now online as well. So not only is it seeping into our politics, it seems to be just normalised the way we're talking to each other.
Let's have a look at a British story now, which is a problem for the Labour government, because, of course, there are a lot of hotels here that are occupied by asylum seekers, and a lot of problems around that.
Yeah, absolutely. So yesterday, the High Court ruled that people seeking asylum who are being housed in a hotel in Epping Forest, which is a district council in Essex, would no longer be able to be there. They basically granted a interim injunction to stop them being placed at the hotel, and this was following weeks and weeks of protests after an asylum seeker living there was charged with sexually assaulting a local girl in the town. Now ministers are bracing for dozens more legal challenges from other council leaders, because we know that these protests, they started in Epping, but they had spread to other hotels housing asylum seekers across the country. This really did blindside the Home Office. They thought that this wouldn't happen. It's all basically been done on a sort of planning technicality, where the council claimed that the hotels had not actually said that this was for their purpose. It was a change in the purpose of the premises. And now they think this decision could substantially impact the government's ability to house asylum seekers in hotels across the UK, which has been government policy for quite a few years now. So this is a really politically difficult issue for the government, and of course only adds fuel to the fire about where we're going to put these people as we have a continuing small boats crisis.
And the department, the Home Office, is obliged to house asylum seekers until their cases are assessed, and sometimes those people are waiting years.
Absolutely. And this all stems back to the Conservative government that sort of under-resourced the asylum case backlog post-Brexit as well. We got far more small boats arrivals, and now what we have is the perfect storm of lots of people waiting in limbo for their claims to be processed, stuck in these hotels. Previously we had them in barges in different parts of the country, and of course this is all creating these community tensions as people in those communities, they're listening to far-right agitators who come in, but also concerns about why these people are getting hotels and food and everything when they feel like they have nothing. A lot of this is stoked up by the far right, but equally, these people need to have their claims processed quickly and fairly. As you say, lots of people are waiting months or even years to have their claims processed.
Finally, let's have a look at this lovely story about a church. It's an old church and it's going to a new home.
Yes, absolutely. So this is a church in Sweden. This is really cool. It's basically this church, 103 years old, and it's having to be relocated in its entirety. So the whole structure is being picked up and moved 5 kilometres, which is 3 miles, along a road in this town in Sweden. It's travelling, so it's been hoisted on a sort of giant trailer. It's travelling at a maximum speed of 500 metres an hour. The journey is expected to take 2 days. It's being live streamed on Swedish TV. People are coming out to watch this huge historic church being moved. Crowds are lining the streets, and it's not only is it a really interesting snapshot into what technology can do and how towns are having to adapt. And this is because there are fissures in the ground due to it being a mining town, but it's also very emotional for a lot of people there, because obviously they have a real connection to the church, and rather than it being demolished or them saying we'll have to demolish it and build a new one, they're trying to preserve it in its entirety. So it's quite a wonderful story, really.
It's lovely. I love the idea they can just pick it up and move it. Yeah. And of course, there's been a lot of television coverage of this. People are absolutely hooked to the sight of this big building, moving across the city. Fantastic story. Yeah. Zoe, thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's Zoe Grunwald, who's Westminster editor at The Lead. And this is The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. Rwanda-backed M23 rebels killed at least 140 people in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo in July, Human Rights Watch said in a report today that highlighted how violence remains elevated despite the US and Qatar-backed peace talks currently underway. The advocacy group said total killings in Rutshuru territory in July may exceed 300, echoing similar findings by the United Nations last month. On Tuesday, India and China agreed to resume direct flights and step up trade and investment flows as the neighbours rebuild ties damaged by a 2020 border clash. The Asian giants are cautiously strengthening ties against the backdrop of US President Donald Trump's unpredictable foreign policy, staging a series of high-level bilateral visits. And Air Canada and its 10,400 unionised flight attendants have reached a tentative deal, ending the airline's first cabin crew strike in 40 years that disrupted travel for hundreds of thousands of passengers. The carrier says operations will resume gradually, with cancellations continuing for up to 10 days as schedules stabilise. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. It's 15:30 in Tokyo, 8:30 in Zurich. Tokyo has been ranked the world's #1 workation destination in 2025 by the International Workplace Group, beating last year's winner Budapest and second place Rio de Janeiro. This is the first year Tokyo was included in the survey, which evaluated 40 cities on criteria including broadband speeds, transport infrastructure, safety and culture. Japan has been developing its workation environment, launching a digital nomad visa last year that allows high earners to work in the country for up to 6 months. I'm joined now by Elizabeth Beattie, who's Asia Business and Economics correspondent at the Japan Times. Elizabeth, I think we need to examine this new portmanteau word, workation. What does it mean to you?
Oh, that's a bit of a tricky one. I associate it, I used to live in Hong Kong, so I associate it with being on holiday and frantically checking my emails and staying on top of work. But I think it's a little bit more structured now. The idea of taking a vacation and then maybe bookending it with some work. I think that's probably more what it means now, post-pandemic.
So how do you receive this news that Tokyo has been selected as the world's #1 workation destination? What do you think are the factors behind it?
As you mentioned, I cover business and economic news from Japan, and something our readers are really interested in is how Japan and Japanese cities measure up globally. So as part of this, I'm always keeping an eye for reports and rankings. And when Japan performs really well or really poorly, that's quite interesting to us to see what drives that. And in the case, Tokyo topped the list. So that kind of got me thinking and got me interested. And I think there's a number of reasons why. I think many of the factors that make it a good workation destination also make it a good holiday destination. It has great quality of life, excellent cultural offerings, food offerings. There are also practical work-friendly aspects like good internet connectivity. But also, Japan is very affordable, so you can kind of keep your life going if you're working a job in one country and go to Japan, and it will be a lot cheaper than a lot of other places. So I'm sure that's a factor as well.
As you say, ratings are very important. In Asia, Seoul ranked 4th, Beijing came 6th. What do you think Tokyo's competitive advantage amongst those other Japanese and Asian cities are, given that they've all got pretty similar infrastructure?
Well, yeah, that was my thought exactly when I first saw this. Is I thought, oh well, where's Kyoto and where's Osaka? Because in some areas they're very, very competitive to Tokyo, but they weren't included in this round of rankings. Perhaps in subsequent years they will be. In terms of Asia, Tokyo cumulatively scored higher in a number of factors. It just nudged over Seoul in a number of areas, and part of that was the number of Michelin-starred restaurants was used as a metric to inform Tokyo's cultural offerings, essentially. And Tokyo has the most Michelin-starred restaurants of any city in the world. So that was a contributing factor. A few other things like affordability also helped. In the case of Beijing, China doesn't have a dedicated digital nomad visa. And so I was curious why it was included at all, but I imagine that it was to highlight that with the digital nomad visa, it would be quite a compelling competitive place in Asia.
So that digital nomad visa was only established in Japan last year. Tell us about that policy. What aims did it have and how is it working out?
Yeah, I think in terms of policy motivations, visa reforms tend to be economically motivated. Digital nomad visas are a good way of attracting financially stable individuals. And this is Japan's answer to what many other countries are doing around the world. So this was launched last year in April and allows passport holders from 51 countries or regions to apply. They must earn at least 10 million yen per year, which is about £50,000, and have to be employed stably or self-employed. They're also allowed to bring a spouse or a child with them on this visa. So this is basically Japan's answer to other digital nomad visas that are in existence. But as of last year, only 257 visas were granted in that category. So it's quite small when you compare the millions coming into Japan of tourists. So quite a small number.
Well, of course, because over-tourism is actually emerging as an issue in Japan. So I wonder if tourist appeal and workation environments coexist.
I think it's a really interesting one. Yes, this mass tourism is resulting at times in some friction in Japan. The government still wants to attract more. They want 60 million inbound tourists by 2030. At the moment, we have about 21 million and coming in the first half of this year. And there's already, like you said, the discussion of over-tourism. I think there's also a compelling argument to be made that in the case of Japan, maybe it's not over-tourism, but it's overly concentrated tourism. So that's kind of a bit of a challenge for the government. But in the case of a digital nomad visa, I do think it is a bit different. Like in Japan, the lines between work and downtime they're not as blurred as in other places. So the holiday is quite different from work. And so I think if you'll come to Japan and you're here to work, or you come to Tokyo to work, you're kind of viewed slightly differently. And Tokyo really absorbs foreign residents very smoothly. If you're not in the middle of Shibuya or doing very touristy things, you're not likely to experience any friction, any tension. And people who know Tokyo well, we just learn there's certain places you avoid. And it's kind of the same if you're a resident, if you're a local, or if you're a temporary local as well.
So if Japan wants to attract more digital nomads, what does it need to do?
I think it's a bit of a tricky one. I mean, Tokyo and Japan in general draw people here for a reason. There's so much to love about the countries and the cities here. In terms of attracting more, I'm speculating slightly, but I think awareness is a factor. I don't think Japan is necessarily associated as a destination for digital nomads. But there's also been a little bit of criticism that perhaps it's too bureaucratic and there needs to be greater flexibility. You might not necessarily want to use the entirety of the visa, but you still have to jump through the same application hoops, whether you're here for 3 months or 6 months or 1 month or whatever. So yeah, factors like that, areas where there could be refinement, but it's still quite new for Japan. And so I'm sure policymakers will be monitoring whether it is effective, whether it's achieving the aims they designed for it.
And how do you think that the trend will impact Japan's economy and local communities in the long term if we do see this big influx?
I think potentially the digital nomad visa provides a opportunity. It provides an opportunity to trial life in Japan, and I think that's good because Japan wants more foreign residents here. They want more highly skilled individuals, and they want to entice more people into rural areas out of the cities. Potentially, if those areas become environments where digital nomads kind of group together or they draw that type of individual, that could have positive knock-on effects. So there is potential here, but it's a little bit hard to know how exactly this will manifest at this stage. It's still quite small. It's still very much in in the early stages, I think, of this trend.
Elizabeth, thank you very much indeed. That's Elizabeth Beattie, who's Asia Business and Economics correspondent at the Japan Times. You're with Monocle Radio. Louis Vuitton embarks on a new journey today as the storied fashion house launches its first ever cosmetics collection. While some branches of the luxury world have seen a slowdown in recent years, beauty divisions seem more impervious to macroeconomic headwinds. Well, sitting down with Monocle's Anita Riotta, our luxury markets editor Brenda Tui explained what makes this debut so unique.
It's very, very exciting. Dame Pat McGrath, who has been their creative director for years and years, worked on all of their shows for the last 20 years, has created this range, 55 lipstick shades and lip balms, 8 eyeshadow palettes will all be launched tomorrow in China.
I do wonder, with a creative director, cosmetics creative director of the sort of fame that Pat McGrath has, do you think this could be the beginning in the luxury space of seeing famous creative directors in the cosmetics brands the way that we see that for the fashion peers?
I think absolutely it is, yes. I mean, what she does is quite iconic.
Absolutely. And it's going to create so much more buzz that, she's attached to this. And you also mentioned that they are going to launch this item in China. Why do you think they've made that choice?
Well, China is the biggest market for Louis Vuitton. So it's a sort of a compliment. They're saying thank you very much. They're actually going to launch the first Louis Vuitton standalone beauty boutique as well. Oh, wow. Yeah, and it's an entry-level product, even though it's very expensive. The lipsticks run at around $160. So I guess that's about 120 pounds, 140 euros. That's a big investment for makeup. But as an entry-level product, it's kind of okay. And they're going to be clad in a Louis Vuitton monogrammed casing.
Well, that's stunning.
So they're a keepsake in addition. They're refillable. Both the eye palettes and the lipsticks and the balms are all refillable. So it's something you can hang on to. It's not a throwaway.
So they're not just launching beauty products, new beauty products. There is a fragrance element to this. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. Louis Vuitton's master nose, Jacques Cavalier Beltrot, hope I've got that right, has created a signature scent for these lipsticks, and that is used with the following flowers: mimosa, jasmine, rose. And he says, of course, it's quite right, that because your mouth is very close to your nose, it's not the same kind of scent you could create for a perfume, for one of their, lauded perfumes. It has to be a little bit different because obviously it could be overpowering, couldn't it? But there is nothing nicer than, the pop of a lipstick top coming off and, a lovely, expensive floral scent.
At this price point, we have seen in other parts of the luxury market these storied houses seeing a slowdown. But data seems to show that beauty is so much more resilient to this. It's actually growing, doing incredibly well. Why do you think we're seeing this divergence?
I would have to say that beauty, as compared to fashion, is easier and costs less money, maybe, to make. It's the product doesn't really cost as much as, say, a silk shirt. And marketing the product, that's really what it's all about. So that's why we always see beauty products, makeup, etc. on the ground floors in the most easily accessible parts of department stores.
I've never thought about that.
Because the markup is huge. So it's crazy not to be involved. I mean, Hermes, Dries Van Noten, Carolina Herrera, they've all created makeup sections to their huge brands. Why? Because they're very profitable.
And, price point being slightly higher or not, as you looked through the products, was there anything that really caught your eye?
The colors are very, very wearable, I would say. There's something for everyone. There doesn't seem to be too many outrageous shades. I know that with the eye palettes, they will each have 4 colors, 3 of them wearable. for every day, and then one sort of outstanding, maybe one sparkle or something with a bit of glitter, maybe not, but something a little bit more dramatic to go along with the 3 easy-to-wear shades.
That was Monocle's luxury markets editor Brenda Tui in conversation with Anita Riotta. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
With UBS, you have a truly global partner, incorporating new technologies, innovative approaches, and unexpected opportunities, leading you to insights that help answer the questions that matter, delivered with passion, care, and unmatched expertise. Because it's about rising with the dawn each day, knowing that we can do even better. That's what banking is to us. Not just work, but a craft. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Well, it's time now for a roundup of television news. And for that, I'm joined by Scott Bryan, who's a TV critic and a media contributor for Monocle, The Guardian and The New York Times. Scott, lovely to have you back on the show. A lot of confusion around the rebranding of MSNBC. Tell us why it's rebranded and why people are confused.
So, I can't even say it now. MSNBC, there we go, that's probably maybe part of the problem, is a left-leaning network in the US. It's pretty much kind of the counter to Fox News. A lot of liberal pundits such as Rachel Maddow. It's obviously kind of quite different to a lot of other channels who might have an impartial news network. In the US, it tends to be quite polarized beyond kind of the main sort of TV linear networks. But basically, they are having to change its name. The company that own it, NBC News, are planning on spinning the company off to a new company called Versant. There's also this sort of sense that maybe the name is a little bit outdated, considering that when the network launched back in the 90s, it was a partnership with Microsoft, hence the name MS, followed by the network NBC. So they've now decided to change the name to MS Now. And if you've been on social media in the US or you just follow a lot of US people, I think you would have seen quite a lot of confusion by the name. I think also quite a lot of confusion with the logo. I mean, to me, it sort of seems to be something that you see in a sort of fake drama about political news, or something that they've sort of cobbled together quite quickly. Some people are saying that it's also a little bit strange that MS Now kind of lends itself to maybe a health condition, multiple sclerosis. And it kind of continues on the trend, I think, of rebrands that actually create quite a lot of headaches for a company that then maybe down the line they end up changing it back to where it was beforehand. You only have to look at the network HBO, of course, the now streaming service that's gone from HBO to HBO Go to HBO Now back to HBO again, because practically every single rebrand that company has come up with has had probably greater amount of social media backlash than any time it's actually been where it was before in terms of plaudits. So it is certainly a rebrand which people might get used to, but at the moment they are certainly not.
And why the reason for the split off from the parent company?
I think it's the fact that, like with a lot of US-based media companies, it's now being seen to be much more competitive to either spin them off because linear sort of TV networks are becoming less profitable, or it is the case that it's better to sort of split away into smaller media companies to try to compete. You've had in the US also this kind of mentality for a while that you have to really consolidate to be successful. You've had the consolidation of Warner Brothers Discovery, which is sort of counters a lot of different networks across Warner Brothers and Discovery into one big company, to then, as quickly as it came together, now split apart again because they realise that one part of the company is very profitable and the other part of the company is not profitable at all. So I think it's a case that because of new entrants like Netflix and Amazon really sort of bringing in quite a lot of sort of changes in the way that we consume media, it's resulting in a lot of older media companies pretty much scrambling. Some doing it very well and being able to move with the times, but some either splitting off, trying to sell them off for smaller parts, for spare parts, or sort of consolidating quite quickly and maybe losing the brand heritage that their company had in the first place.
Well, I mean, as you say, the nature of television is changing, but possibly even dying. That's according to Conan O'Brien.
Yes, Conan O'Brien is a sort of late night TV host, of course, hosted The Tonight Show for a small period in the US. Late night TV is an institution and runs a lot later than a lot of TV in a lot of other countries. Of course, it's been in the news quite a lot recently because Stephen Colbert, who's one of the hosts, was attacking Trump quite openly during his show. And then lo and behold, the following week, the network CBS said that they were cancelling the programme. And that happened to be at the same time that of a merger with another company, Skydance, which happens to have needed sort of Trump's approval. There's a lot of speculation about whether this media deal had anything to do with the show's cancellation. But I think what Stephen Colbert was talking about, and so what Conan O'Brien has been talking about in news over the course of the last 48 hours, is essentially the fact that late night TV is coming to the end of its era. An era is a brand of sort of late night, is a genre that's been lasting since pretty much the dawn of American TV, something that was initially done on the cheap because it was a way to sort of create a lot of hours of late night infomercials and commercials alongside it, to becoming an American institution. And essentially it's the mentality that streaming services are not that interested in this style of programming. It's not massively profitable on streaming. So he's sort of saying, you know, if we don't find an opportunity for these comedians or for the next generation of comedians, where are they going to go? It's not a rosy picture really, but it is quite interesting of having somebody who is a central part of it for so long being so open about his possible demise.
Finally, a few years ago I went to see a magnificent play called Ink, and I'm so pleased to see now that it is coming to the screen. Tell us more.
Yes, Danny Boyle is to direct an adaptation of the award-winning play based on the rise of the Rupert Murdoch empire, and it's going to be having Guy Pearce who will be taking the lead role. And it's, I mean, as you said, it's a play that has received a lot of praise. It was it premiered on the stage, I think, back in 2017. It's written by James Graham, who, of course, has written for the small screen, written a lot for TV as well. It'll be interesting to see, kind of like with Succession, of course, another sort of TV show that was, I mean, in this case, sort of very loosely based on the Murdoch family, how Murdoch will react to it, sort of being on the big screen. But I think it's also the case that what I find interesting is that Rupert Murdoch had used Twitter sort of back in 2012 and did praise Danny Boyle's work back then, sort of referring the London Olympics as being his opening ceremony work as being spectacular and being a creative genius, but possibly in his own views a little too politically correct. It'll be interesting to see whether Murdoch watches this and then comments it sort of publicly when it comes out formally.
Scott, thank you very much indeed. That's Scott Bryan there, and you're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Finally, on today's show, fortunes have been made in the world of cookbooks by promising short prep times and easy recipes. But for a chef like Malaysian-born Mandy Yin, who runs Sambal Shiok restaurant in London, backing an approachable version of her nation's cuisine isn't just about convenience. That's why she wrote her new book, Simply Malaysian, to make sure the food of her childhood continues to grow in popularity beyond Malaysia's borders, not just in restaurants, but in kitchens worldwide. In the process, she's also ensuring that heritage gets passed on to a new generation, starting with her own son. Monocle's Chiara Ramella finds out more.
Being a working mum, juggling so many things of being a restaurateur, writer, doing other work as well as running the household and dealing with my kid. So now my cooking really has to be extremely efficient, very, very quick, and leaning into store-bought staples, as well as a few things that I like having around that I make myself, just to put in front of my very small family now as very tasty Malaysian dinners or lunches. Minimum fuss. This book has no snacks, no desserts, which is actually quite unusual. I'm all about getting food on the table ASAP. How much does Malaysian food lend itself to being simple? Because I think that there is a misconception from people who perhaps are not used to cooking it that you do have to leave the rendang on for 20 million hours and this kind of things. But can you actually make Malaysian food simple? 100%. This is why I'm so excited that Simply Malaysian is out, because this is really how we eat at home. It's quite important to us, actually, especially breakfast and lunch, to have something cooked and hot. So for lunchtimes, we very commonly go to what we know as economy rice stalls or restaurants, where you're handed a plate of rice and there's like a selection of like 20, 30, 40, 50 different dishes. And this is a variety. You've got like vegetables, proteins, eggs, like everything, and a very fully balanced meal. So this book really is a snapshot of that, and indeed includes a lot of recipes that my mother/father have cooked for me throughout my life. I want to take a step back, because you kind of hinted there at your upbringing, and then obviously now you live and work here in London. What are those memories that are conjured up by some of the dishes here? And maybe you can point us to a couple of dishes and just sort of take us back, like a Proustian Madeleine, to that moment that kind of evokes for you. So, for example, economy rice, like it's just got so many different dishes, as I mentioned, at least 20 dishes. Generally, we love our eggs. So, for example, there's an entire chapter on egg-centric dishes. For example, it sounds very simple, but so delicious. Fried eggs with bird's eye chilies and soy sauce. Like, honestly, you ask any Malaysian, we've all had that. Likewise, there's a recipe in there for sesame ginger chicken. Very straightforward, easy braise. It will be very, very familiar to Malaysians. And then you'll always have a vegetable dish. There's a really lovely dish, sambal, okra and aubergines. And it comes together in literally in as much time as it takes to cook your rice. So those three dishes, for example, that I mentioned just now, it's not only balancing flavors. So, for example, not all of them are extremely spicy. There's pops of chili, but the sesame ginger chicken it has no chili at all. But then you get a pop of chili from the sambal with the okra and aubergine, or you'll dig into the egg. So in every mouthful with a bit of rice, you can have something different, and that's the joy of Malaysian cuisine. So that's sort of going down sort of economy rice, or sort of dishes with rice. But there's also so many beautiful noodle dishes and one-pot rice dishes, and actually veering into pasta in this book. So all Asians, Southeast Asians, will love or will be familiar with Indomie. It's an instant noodle, but honestly, we all have this packet at home. If you run out of that packet, I've developed a recipe, very, very simple one, to evoke that. And it's just very easily done, because you just need some shallot oil to go. Yes, it takes time to make shallot oil, but it just sits there in your pantry for months, So just leaning into little useful store cupboard staples like that. And otherwise, sort of Hainanese chicken rice, you might be familiar with that. I've got a one-pot Hainanese chicken rice version, and it's just very, very simple. And that's how I have to cook, and I enjoy cooking now. You mentioned your 3.5-year-old there. As somebody who has a child in a nation that is not where they were born themselves, how do you think, or how do you hope that your cooking is going to shape his memories? It's so important to me that he understands a bit of his blood and where he's come from. So at the moment, I'm really, really trying to get back to Southeast Asia at least once a year or every 2 years, just so that he really comes to understand how important food is to Malaysians and our extended family. And actually, this book is dedicated to him, because I wish I had a book like this when I went off to uni and really started cooking for myself. So yeah, I do feel that he already has an amazing palate. He's very comfortable with eating, a bit of chili. I was going to say, do you feed him, you spoon feed him sambal? No, I mean, no. Very simply, for example, I don't cook anything differently for him. We will just have a curry, whatever it is, but I'll just take proteins or potatoes, whatever, out of it with plenty of rice, so at least he gets the flavors. I'm just aghast at a lot of my friends and peers who have young children, and they're like, they can't take any chili at all. I'm like, but you're Asian. What? I can't. That's just so anathema to me. I just can't understand that. So no, I hope that he will come to have a similar palate to myself.
That was Mandy Yin, author and restaurateur, speaking with Monocle's Chiara Romella, and her book Simply Malaysian is out now. And that's all we have time for today. Thanks to our producers Anita Riota, Chris Chermak and Ryuma Takahashi. Our studio manager was Elliot Greenfield, with editing assistance by Maylee Evans and Hunter Wang. After the headlines, there's more music on the way, and The Briefing is live at midday in London. I'm Georgina Godwin, and I'll return on The Globalist at the same time tomorrow. Thank you for listening.